We have two basic drivers, okay? So drivers being motivational impetus, what causes us to act and react. And those two basic drivers are called object referral or self-referral. And what that essentially means is that we create some kind of action based on trying to please other people, try to attach ourselves to the outcome of that action, or reciprocally, our reaction is based on an external factor.
From On It, this is Total Human Optimization, a show about inspiring peak performance through a combination of unique experts and actionable information. On today's show, we talk with Brian Grasso and Carrie Campbell on how to find love. So a little bit different topic than our listeners are used to. Why should we really concern ourselves with finding love and finding love the right way? Why is that part of making us a totally optimized human?
Oh man, that's a great, I love great questions off the top. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I want to go first.
Absolutely.
We just did the notorious look at each other to see who was going to chime in first on that one. So, if I were to chime in very simply from a basic human need and primal need, I think that it's the one thing that we all crave. I think we all are born into this world wanting to be loved, wanting to feel love, and it's the ultimate place of happiness and peace. If I were to be honest,
I agree, and I just want to add to that I think that it's not so much the necessity of needing to find love from an external place. To be brutally honest, I think our whole basis on finding love by Valentine's Day includes, and I know it might sound a little namby-pamby to some of the listeners right now, but self-love. I mean, our society is rife with divorce rates and unhappiness, and statistical analysis is one thing. We can track, how many people get married and divorced, but how many people live unhappily in relationships? How many people settle for spouses and dates and mates that they don't particularly have that spark with, but they literally are settling in life for that, kind of mediocre love. And for Carrie and myself, it really is about elevating your own self-love. And when you do that, natural attraction of external love just happens. And that's, I think, the basis of what we're trying to get across to people.
That's a great point, guys. I love that you said that. And we hear that a lot from self-help gurus, this idea that you have to love yourself first. And like you said, it does get a little namby-pamby with the repetition of it. So what are the practical steps to loving yourself first before you can be any good to anybody else?
Yeah, again, Sean Heisey with the badass question.
Let's just dive right in.
You want to go first?
You can go
All
first.
right, so you're right. It is namby-pamby. We get annoyed by it. But, there has to be some practicality to it. So, first and foremost, if I were to give a number one practical step regarding loving yourself and really finding true love for you, I would say tell the truth. Because most of the time people aren't. I think, part of the namby-pamby, Sean, in the whole motivational industry for me is that it's all about the fortune cookie advice. It's all about the superficial nonsense, and we all get really excited about the book or the motivational quote that just is kind of one big nonsense fest of, look in the mirror and tell yourself you love yourself. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work for anybody. It's never worked for anybody. And people who don't have real self-love, if they do exercises like that, either they end up laughing at themselves because of how ridiculous it is, or they bury themselves farther in a pit of self-loathing. So for Carrie and myself, we encourage people to tell the truth. Look, if you don't have love for yourself, if you don't find yourself attractive, if you don't find yourself particularly intelligent, if you don't find yourself worthy of real external love, then say that. That is where it all has to start. There should be no shame and no silly rhetoric about finding the baseline of where you are in real life. If you're not assessing, you're guessing. So for anybody listening, look, if you don't have a lot of self-worth or a lot of self-love, stop avoiding that, stop hiding from it, and admit it to yourself. When we start telling the truth, we begin to create solutions of healing, and that's where it has to start.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I'm thinking about people who live, inside of relationships in particular, or people who are single who are looking for love. And they might be asking themselves, like, how do I start finding the truth? What does that mean, right? And I was going to say the same thing, that I think we need to tear down the walls that we've protected ourselves with, so that we can really look in the mirror and see what's holding us back. I think that the starting point has to be with assessing what feels good and what doesn't feel good. I think that as a society, we've kind of accepted this almost like the status quo, that it's, in relationships, it's normal to not be 100% happy, or, you're always going to kind of complain and nag and have these issues with your spouse. And, whether that's true or false, I'm not one to say or judge, but what I do think is that we have to be able to look in the mirror and say, you know what, this doesn't feel good. This part of my life doesn't feel good. And before we point the finger outside of ourselves to what our spouse is doing, or what all the people who you're trying to date are doing, we have to look at ourselves and assess, like, what's the driver that's coming from you that is leading you down this road to accept this kind of not feel good in your life.
Yeah, I'm going to add, and I'm going to apologize up front for continuing the dialogue from our end. But let me just add this. Carrie and I had a client one time from a fairly small European country. But I remember when we first started working with her, her big claim was that all the men in this particular country were not nice. They were rude. They were not friendly. They did not know how to treat a woman well. And like, I guess when you're mired in the darkness of it all, those kinds of statements become actually very accurate to you. You believe in them. But what we had to do with this woman, who's a lovely, lovely person, is actually have her look in the mirror and admit to herself that her worth in her own eyes was not where it needed to be. And when you delude yourself on stuff like that, when you avoid saying things like that, you end up creating generalized statements like every single man or every single woman in this demographic or in that country or at this level of economic status is somehow not good or not good enough. And those are delusional kinds of statements that I guarantee a lot of people listening right now will resonate with, because they make them. So for Carrie and myself, finding love is all about being honest with yourself first.
So how do we begin turning that around, though? Because you don't want to look in the mirror all day and say, okay, I suck, I hate myself. How do we begin to love? You said in the article, make a good point about counting your wins. Is that the first step?
It is, yeah. And just to be clear, we're not asking people to tell themselves they suck. We're asking them to admit where they don't have full confidence or full love or full worth in themselves. Nobody sucks. We don't want people to use that language, but Sean, in my past, I didn't have a lot of self-worth at all. And it wasn't until I admitted that to me that I was able to change it all around. And where did I change it all around? Is you're absolutely right. It's based on the article we wrote. It's about counting wins. The point Karen and I make all the time is that the human brain has evolved as a very negative instrument. So we tend to look at, see, remember, retain, and react to negativity with a lot more intensity than we do positivity. And that's just kind of happenstance for how the brain has evolved. But the brain is a plastic instrument, which means it's changeable. And in order to change the brain from one that has a perspective of negativity or of lacking self-worth, etc., we have to enumerate our wins and our positives on a regular basis, every 24-hour cycle. That's how Carrie and I end our day. We count our wins from the day, no matter how bad the day was or what didn't go right. We find the silver lining, we find the lessons learned, we find the valuable experiences, and we enumerate them as wins. And that's how it all starts to change the literal nature of the brain.
I want to add to the first point that Brian was talking about, because I think that, I think people are really not okay with being uncomfortable with the parts of their life that they want to grow within. It's like admitting that if you have a self-worth issue or you feel like you're not good enough, we automatically have this perception that somehow we're broken. And so we shelter ourselves from the world. We isolate ourselves. We don't talk about it because we feel so ashamed and so embarrassed that we, quote unquote, we lack self-love for ourselves. And I think that, I think that's a huge society at large, because as far as I'm concerned, that's the driver that continues to perpetuate people feeling like they're not good enough to begin with. So I think that there's a whole acceptance that has to come around. I mean, in Brian and I, in the work that we do, acceptance is one of the very first things that we go through with people. And acceptance that you're a human being, acceptance that you're not broken, that because you have self-worth issues or you don't have self-love for yourself, doesn't mean that you need to be fixed or remedied. It just means that you need to choose to get on the path of taking accountability and getting better day by day. And using tools like counting your wins is exactly how you do that. We don't need to beat ourselves further down.
Okay, so let's take this into the world of technology today, because the way most people date and find new relationships is through social apps like Tinder, Bumble, and there's a number of other ones. How is that changing our self-perception and the way we date? Because with a pool of so many people available on those apps, you can swipe from one to the next. And, from a male point of view who used to be on those apps, there was a little bit of feeling of depression when you didn't get a reply from somebody you really wanted to talk to on the apps. But, that's easily erased whenever somebody else, replies that you sent a message to. So in this age of technology, with the way things are, and, we don't really go up to people and start new conversations anymore. This is the way society does it. So how do we take, those elements of everything you guys are saying and apply it to the world we live in now with these technologies that we have to deal with?
Yeah, that's a great question, Orlando. Let me paint it this way. We have two basic drivers, okay? So drivers being motivational impetus. What causes us to act and react? And those two basic drivers are called object referral or self-referral. And what that essentially means is that we act in certain ways, or we create some kind of action based on trying to please other people, try to attach ourselves to the outcome of that action, or reciprocally, our reaction is based on an external factor. So what you just painted there was perfect. Like, I would get depressed if I would send a message and the person wouldn't message me back. That's called object referral. It means our happiness, our fulfillment, our self-worth, our self-love is based on whether or not we get a reply from a text message or an email. Now, I don't know how to say this with any more tact. It's a horrible place to live. Our entire existence becomes about acceptance from other things or other people. Self-referral means that your actions are in accordance to what you want to do for you, and that you are not waiting for nor relying on somebody else's approval or somebody else's reaction to maintain worth or self-love. And that peels us right back to where we started. That if we do not have self-worth, if we do not have self-love, then we are going to be living in an object referral environment, which means our socks will go up and down based on whether or not somebody responds to us, whether or not somebody texts us back or calls us back within a duration or a time frame that we feel is appropriate. Our entire love and our entire love life is based on something or someone else. And we are talking about very dangerous territory if that's the way we choose to live. So again, I repeal us back to where this conversation started about being honest with yourself about self-love and self-worth to make sure that's intact first. My second part of that is it goes back to the other tool of counting wins. So in order to generate ourselves from object referral to self-referral, it's not about hinging on whether or not we got a reply. It's about praising ourselves for the fact we sent the message to begin with. And I know it sounds a little trite, but it's true. Where our focus goes is what our truth becomes. So if we are going to slip into some depression or some sadness or some angst or some frustration that we didn't get a reply, we can change that by reminding ourselves daily, but you know what? I'm in the game. I'm putting myself out there vulnerably. I'm finding people I'm attracted to, and I'm telling them so. That's a massive win. And when we carry that perspective, our self-worth changes, our self-love changes, our object versus self-referral changes. And that's the practicality of it all.
In addition to that, I think that raising your level of awareness in the honesty of it all, insofar as like really what's going on, like, object referral. I'm assuming for most people listening right now, that's probably a new concept they've never heard about before. So when you hear that, like, what exactly does that mean? How do you know when you're doing it? Because I think sometimes, so many people kind of move through the actions of this world without even realizing that they're falling into these patterns of maybe waiting for messages coming back and self-sabotaging behaviors and so on and so forth. So, I think the first thing I want to say is it's important to note that, like, we're never telling people not to feel, right? So, that you feel disappointment because someone, wasn't interested is one thing. That disappointment then leads to a change in your behaviors and paralyzes your forward momentum in life, in either the dating world or in life in general. That's the hinging factor for me because, let's face it, there are people who will, literally send out a couple messages or whatever, but then could spend the next 4 hours sitting and waiting for a reply, going back and forth to the computer, your phone, checking it over and over and over again. And what you've actually done in that 4 hours is halted whatever else you could have been doing for yourself to continue to make yourself a better version of who you want to be. So I think for me, it comes down to being able to be aware and assess, like, okay, you're disappointed, that's okay. But is that disappointment to turn into a change in your behaviors that isn't actually serving the outcome that you're desiring? That's a huge point that I think if people were able to interrupt those behavior changes, they'd actually start to be able to be more self-referred because they're channeling their energy back to themselves.
Okay, so how do people become honest with themselves with what they're actually looking for? Because I feel like, if you put something out there that, I'm a person that's looking for somebody that shares the same style of music or the same type of food or believes in certain political beliefs, you put yourself in a big hole. And, if you're interested in somebody physically, it's really easy to kind of ignore some part of a disagreement. So you go through with it and then you end up unhappy. So, what are some tools there that we can use to really, make sure that we're being honest with ourselves when we say, what we're looking for?
Yeah, these are great questions. I think for me, my answer is twofold. First of all, we distill it down to expectations. I think that, and again, I don't mean to beat the drum over and over again, but when you don't have a great deal of self-worth, which is not uncommon, let's be honest, and let's not, pretend the 8,000-pound gorilla doesn't exist. There's a lot of people listening right now who, if they were honest with themselves, they don't have a great deal of self-worth. When you're in that place, you can oftentimes forget that expectations are both legitimate and necessary. What do you expect of a date, a spouse, a mate? And are you prepared to put a line in the sand that says, these are my expectations? People who are comfortable in their self-worth and their self-love, they have expectations. This is how they expect to be treated. This is how they expect to be cared for, how they expect to be heard or listened to, et cetera, et cetera. So I think having expectations going in is a very important part of it all. But my second part, Orlando, really speaks to something you said. I don't think looks or musical preferences or clothing or fashion style, I don't think any of those things are superficial. I don't think they are superficial. I don't think we should categorize them as superficial. But I find it amazing that we do start to pick apart the potential mate we're after via categories that involve things like music and looks and fitness or fashion sense, etc. How about the way someone makes you feel? Why don't we ever use that as a regulatory system? Because, you've brought up technology. I think part of the fall down, the massive fall down, when it comes to technology and love, is that intangibles can't be accounted for. And yet in real love, intangibles are all that exist. So I mean, we have to understand, I talked about this in the article as well with Sean, that we call it imagination theater. It's all about elevating your self-worth, elevating your self-love, having expectations of the way you choose to be treated and not treated. And we call it imagination theater, spending time every day literally imagining the relationship you want. And Sean pressed me on this in the interview because what he wanted to understand is that, I mean, am I imagining my perfect mate, the way she looks, the way she talks? No, you're imagining the way you feel. You're imagining feeling accepted, feeling unconditionally loved. You're imagining engaging in numbing, wonderful conversations. Those are the things that true love are built off of, and yet they can't be accounted for in the world. So that doesn't mean that technology shouldn't play a role. I mean, that's the direction we're going. But I think there's a much deeper layer to answering this than just setting, the profile on a given app to musical preferences and fashion sense and economic, stature, etc. I mean, Carrie and I met in 2006 for exactly 2 days. She was married and I had a girlfriend that day, and I knew it then. I didn't say a thing because she was married, but it was 3.5 years later, and we had not communicated one day since that weekend in 2006. But I had a brush with death, a significant car accident, and a couple weeks after that accident, my roommate at the time, because we were talking about death and mortality in life, my roommate said to me, "Have you ever fallen in love with someone and not told them?" And I said, "Yes." So my roommate said, "Well, tell them now." Campbell that night and told her. There was I didn't know anything about this woman. I didn't know her musical preferences. I didn't know her fashion sense. I didn't know her religion. I didn't know her economic status. I knew what I felt. And I think everyone listening needs to have that as a caveat they pay attention to. Because Orlando, you said, we don't just go up and start conversations anymore. Yeah, but that's a choice. It's not that we can't go up and start conversations in a gym or a grocery store or a church function or the park or anywhere else. We're choosing to use technology. And I have no problem with that, but it doesn't make connection in real life obsolete. It's a choice we're making.
Yeah. I just want to add as well. I think that anytime we define anything with a certain list of criteria, I think we're closing ourselves down to opportunity. So, I know, there's so many people who have these lists of expectations. And when I'm talking expectations, I'm talking like the list of 6 feet tall, blonde haired, blue eyed, makes X amount of money per year. And I'm not saying that I think that that's right or wrong, that you want those things in a mate. The only thing I'm saying is that when we create a definition of what we're looking for that is specific on the superficial level, we end up potentially not seeing what's right in front of our eyes that may actually be, quote unquote, exactly what we're looking for. So if there's one thing I would say, it's that create, like Brian said, create expectations around what your relationship feels like, have your preferences, create a profile that exhibits your preferences, but don't be so myopically focused on it being X. I could come along and be 1,000 times better than you ever imagined.
Yeah, and my bad for adding one more thing, guys. In many ways, I think we're the best interviews in the entire world. But in many ways, I think that we frustrate. Yes, we live in a technological world, and yes, a lot of what we're talking about is the contemporary realities of everything, but having honest conversations with yourself, being honest if you're lacking self-worth, lacking self-love, counting your wins. It doesn't matter if we're talking about spiritual, wisdom, or even modern day motivation. the reigning wisdom that has never changed across humanity with respect to success, happiness, fulfillment, and love. Yourself. And the more you know yourself, the more you know the way you want to be feeling in a relationship. The more you know yourself, the more you recognize where you do lack some self-love or self-worth. It doesn't become about the musical preferences or the fashion sense at that point. It becomes about what fulfills you. And it's a really hard question to answer. What fulfills me, unless you know yourself and you know what fulfillment feels like to you. So we don't mean to be redundant, but that's going to be the theme we echo throughout this entire interview.
Guys, these are all killer points, and I would love to explore all of them in depth, but I just want to go back to the one about way back when we're talking about physical attributes, and you make a great point in the article about, as you mentioned, the imagination theater, sitting down and visualizing what you want. If you focus on just visualizing the person you want, what you want their soul to be, the things that you want to feel when you're with them, automatically the physical attributes take care of themselves. So the example I give in the article is if you want to be somebody who's, if you're a big skier and you want to be with somebody who shares your passion for skiing, you do things like imagine yourselves on the ski slopes together, what it's like to take a skiing trip, taking skiing lessons. Imagine yourself in that environment, and then your actions and habits are going to conform to that vision. You're going to find yourself out there fraternizing with other skiers more often. You're going to put yourself, without even really thinking about it, in positions where you're going to meet people who share that passion and up your chances of falling in love with somebody like that. Can you talk a little bit more about that strategy and how the actions and habits are influenced by the mindset?
You just mic dropped that one, Sean. That was perfect. Yeah. No, I mean, so the mindset does affect actions and habits. And if we were to backtrack on that 1 degree, we'd see that in society, most of what we try to tell people is if they want change in their life, they need to change their habits and their behaviors and their actions. But really, that's inconsistent with a sustainable change. See, all of the actions we take every single day, all the habits we have, all the behaviors we keep, they're being driven by our mindset, our perspective on ourselves, and our perspectives that we carry in life. So if we're looking to create sustainable change in our actions, behaviors, and habits, what we have to do is we have to change the way we perspectify the world and ourselves. And Sean, you gave our basic classic example regarding imagination theater. How do you want to feel? What does fulfillment feel like in respect to being in a relationship? If you're an avid skier, if you're an avid snowboarder, if you never want to admit this on any sort of dating site, but your real passion is poetry. It doesn't jive with the way you look, so you're kind of embarrassed about it. You never say it, but really your passion is poetry. Theater is about us using our imagination to depict scenes of things we want from a feeling perspective. If poetry is your passion, then see yourself sharing your poetry with a significant other. And you're right, Sean. We're not trying to do blonde hair, blue eyes, 5'9". It's none of that. We're chasing bringing the feeling of how we want love into us. And when we do that, we end up changing something in our unconscious called a bias filter. Our bias filter starts to move and change and reposition itself, so that now what happens to our actions and behaviors and habits is they start to augment to this new perspective we're carrying about ourselves and our lives. And that's all the result of the bias filter shifting, which happens because we're imagining life a little differently. Now, again, to some, this is very namby-pamby and kind of pseudoscience. It's not. One of my very favorite quotes in the entire world, and now I can't remember who said it, but he said that fear and worry are nothing more than a misuse of imagination. If you're worried about things in life, if you're afraid of things in life, if you're depressed and you can't find the love of your life, all that really means is that you're misusing your imagination. Imagine what you want. Your behaviors, actions, and habits will start to align towards that. And if you want proof from a really smart person, Um, Albert Einstein said it himself. Imagination is life's coming attraction. Imagine what you want. It starts to shape itself around you. That's not the secret of the law of attraction. You literally start to change your physical habits, behaviors, and actions every single day as a result of this new imagination you're carrying.
Yeah, I want to take that into like a practical example for a second, because I've done, as a clinical counselor, I've done a lot of work with either couples who are going through a really difficult time and can't decide whether to stay together or not, or one person out of a relationship who is basically sitting in this purgatory of not knowing if they should stay or if they should go. And when I'm working on imagination theater with people who are in that situation, I actually go so far as have them create their imagination theater, imagining that it's not their spouse, so that they're imagining the ideal world of a relationship for them. That way, they're able to create the vision of what they want, and then they're not holding like a gun to their spouse's head that their spouse has to conform to this vision. But that's how all the couples who I work with end up finding the answer to quite honestly, whether it's time to call it quits or whether they're going to continue to make it work together. They sometimes just have to find their way back to each other through remembering where the vision started in the first place. So I think that's so powerful and so key in finding love.
Okay, so that harps on a good point that I wanted to bring up. This podcast is about, finding love, and, the most of the people this is going to apply to are the people that are not in a relationship. But for people that are in a relationship, what are some key things to look for if you're in the wrong one, if maybe you need to have a second thought about your relationship, because it doesn't always have to be arguments all the time. What if the relationship is argument free, but it's still not the right one? What are some key identifiers that people that are in relationships, might want to take a look at?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to go back to a second to some like practical life experience on this one, because the number of times I have had people say to me, "What do you think? Should I leave?" Which is always like, it's an impossible question for anybody to answer, right? So for me, it always comes down to taking the time to really find out if it is time to leave, or if it's time for you to, if you need to change things about your relationship, right? And so I think the first thing I want to say is that the number one element, a key element for me, is to acknowledge the fact that you're not happy. Acknowledge the fact that there's change that has to happen, and then choose to basically no longer sit in the purgatory of not making a decision, because that's what happens to so many couples. They know they're not happy, but they accept the relationship they're in, and they sit in this years of purgatory of, do I want to go or do I want to stay? Do I want to go or do I want to stay? So that's the first thing I think you have to really look at. Like, are you happy or are you not happy? Do you love your partner or not? And it doesn't matter which way you make a decision, right? Because, maybe this is, contrary to what most people would say, but I'm not pro splitting up or pro staying together. I'm pro your happiness. So that means that sometimes that comes in the form of breaking up as opposed to staying together. Do you want to chime in? Oh, sorry. So sometimes that means that you do break up. But I think that you have to choose not to sit in purgatory. And then before you start looking at all the things that are wrong with your partner, look at yourself. Ask yourself, what do you bring to this relationship that maybe you need to start creating change in yourself? Are you being reactive? Do you need to decrease reactivity? Are you keeping the fight going? Do you need to interrupt that pattern? Because when you take charge and you stop looking to the other person to change, it's amazing how much starts to change in and of itself.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that, and I'm not going to say a whole lot different, because obviously Carrie and I agree on this topic completely. Orlando, you mentioned what are the key indicators, and I think that that's actually something we need to be very wary of. Indicators like life advice, love advice gets reduced down to finite sound bits or sound bites so simply in our society, but oftentimes it doesn't stand the test of truth. So what do I mean by that? Well, Carrie and I have a concept we call energy in, energy out. Okay. And what that means is that there are certain things in life that give us lots of energy and make, we feel energetic in their presence or doing these things. And some things are energy out, meaning they take a lot of mental, emotional taxation out of us. Now, that doesn't make those things good or bad inherently. For example, Carrie and I basically spend 24 hours a day together. I mean, we're always together. And that it's a very energy in place environmentally for us to be. We love being around each other. But I don't think that that's an indicator that our relationship is any better than a couple who maybe, they don't spend all their waking hours together, that quite frankly, they enjoy taking separate vacations from time to time. It doesn't mean that they don't love each other as much as Carrie and I do. It just means that maybe they have a stronger independent streak, or they have a stronger desire to be alone from time to time. So indicators sometimes fall flat.
Yeah, that's great. Guys, we're running a little short on time, so I just want to sneak one more in there. With everything that you've mentioned, a lot of it, I mean, it's all great information, but a lot of it is going to kind of go in one ear and out the other unless people make a practical effort to make it a part of their lives on a regular basis. And one of the things you mentioned in the article about how to do that is just simple journaling, writing down intentions, writing down what you're visualizing in your head after you do the visualization exercise. Can you talk a little bit about the practical steps to making written notes about these things that can help drive you closer to this love goal or any goal?
Four things, Sean, really easy. Review your direction every single day, which means you're writing down in your journal every single day where you're going in life. Where do you want to be? What do you want to achieve? Who do you want to become over the next 12 months? And you're reflecting on your journey and you're writing that down every single day. That's number one. Number two, you're counting your wins over the past 24 hours, meaning what are the things that happened that were positive? What are the lessons learned? What's the traction you've made on your goals and the direction you're traveling? That's number two. Number three, I usually can't win. Number three
is imagine your outcome. So that's essentially the imagination theater aspect of it, right? Have your vision, and then every single day you're going to spend some time imagining the feeling, the experience. Just like you painted the picture of skiing down the ski hill, you want to imagine a story or a scenario where you're in your life with that person and experiencing that every day.
And the last one we saved for last because it's the one we started with. So we figured, how we're going in is how we're going to come out. Learn your language. How are you talking to yourself every single day? Sit quietly and listen. Ask yourself probing questions about your love life, your potential to find the love of your life. You will start hearing answers that right now I guarantee you aren't expecting to hear. You're going to start hearing answers related to your own self-worth, your own self-love. It's not that we want you to tell yourself that you suck, but we want you to know what you're saying to yourself, because that is your mindset. That's your bias filter. That's your unconscious programming, and that's what's affecting your actions, habits, and behaviors. If you don't know that language, you can't change it. So those are the four things you want to journal daily.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show this week. If you want to listen to past episodes or make sure you get the latest as they are released, take a moment to subscribe on iTunes. Also, do us a favor and leave a review while you're there. If you have a question, please contact us on Twitter at Onnit, ONNIT, and make sure to check out onnit.com for the latest in supplements, functional foods, and equipment. This episode was co-hosted by Sean Heisen. I'm Orlando Rios, and you've been listening to Total Human Optimization.